Thank you all very much. While we're waiting for folks to come back in, let me begin by asking you a personal question. When you were in school in Syracuse, New York, you used to deliver newspapers. Do you have any regrets that you left behind the sky's the limit field of newspapering for the dead-end career of intelligence?
You know, I actually worked this out with Bill McCraven. I told him, you take the journalism route and we'll deliver it for you. You know, the one thing I'd leave you, though, shorter stories are better. It makes for a lighter paper and it's easier to throw.
Well, good to know. That's practical advice. You know, you are the head of the NSA, and there is a federal law that says journalists must refer to you as the super secret NSA, as Shift F10 on our computers. But let me start by asking you one of those 1 to 10 questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well prepared is the U.S. for a serious cyber attack on a critical part of our infrastructure?
That's a great question. From my perspective, I would say around a 3. And the reason I say a 3 is there are many aspects of defending the nation from a serious cyber attack. First, we have to be able to see it and respond to it at network speed. An awful lot of work by the government with DHS, with FBI, with DOD, with the intel community to bring that together with industry. We can't see it today. In fact, that's one of the great reasons we're pushing for this legislation. We need the ability to share information so that we can see an attack and respond to it in real time. So that's one of the key things. The second part is how do you protect your systems and how do you come up with a defensible architecture? When you look at the systems that we have and the way industry works, industry has a variety of capabilities. You know, the financial community has some of the best. The internet service providers are a class act in cybersecurity. But there are others who need help. When we see and get insights to a cyber intrusion event, working with FBI and DHS, when we tell the company that has that, their first question oftentimes is, what do we do? And so I think helping to set those standards, how you're going to protect that system is absolutely important. And the last thing I just put on the table, because you did open up this venue here on this, is education. You know, when you think about it, it's interesting. I had a chance to sit down and talk to people who defend networks on how we train them as system operators and stuff in defense. And you ask them, so how many here know about Backtrack or Metasploit or some of the on-net capabilities that you have that are used for penetration testing and hacking? Publicly available free tools. That's what the penetration testers do, but it's not often how we train the people who work on the systems. And so we train people at different levels. And if you looked at this, you'd say, but it's one network. You're being exploited by guys who have tools and training that far exceed your capabilities. So from my perspective, pushing that training, and we have a great program. It's jointly run by NSA and DHS, working with over 100 different colleges and universities to set up an information assurance cybersecurity portfolios. And I think that's key.
These are sort of best practices?
Best practices, teaching them things about information security, how this works, information assurance, how you can protect your networks, why you need passwords, what are the things that it takes to actually defend a network. And I'd take it one step further. How do we train those of us who didn't grow up having an iPad or an iPhone on security? You know, everybody in this room now has an iPhone or an iPad. And when you look at the number of exploits out there, they have almost doubled in a year for your mobile technology.
What do you mean by exploits?
So these exploits are capabilities that a hacker or a nation state could use to penetrate your phone, grab your credentials, steal files, grab your voice off of it, or jump to another one of your computers and get access. And so mobile security in cyberspace is going to be huge. We're going mobile. We've got to have a solution.
But is that a big concern? I mean, when we've been talking today about attacks on the infrastructure, the power system, water and sewer, something like that, that seems like a very different thing than somebody getting the names and addresses out of your cell phone.
Right. Except that cell phone now, you know, 2006, 2007, you had different telephone circuits were analog in many cases, going digital. Now they're completely digital. So if you think about it, your cell phone is communicating completely digital as part of the internet. Your attack surfaces for adversaries to get on the internet now include all those mobile devices. And so if you want to penetrate, you can go through a landline, through the internet that way. Oh, now we can go through the iPhone or the Android or your mobile device into the network that way. And the attack surface has grown significantly. So the ability to penetrate your target set is huge. And the reason that that's so important on the mobile devices is, we have great companies out there and great people working cybersecurity and coming up with solutions for it. Those solutions are mostly for your landline devices, your computers at home and stuff like that. The mobile security situation lags. It's far behind it.
Have you ever gone to Google or Apple and said, we'd like to help you make a better, more secure device?
We work with industry on all these things. Not just me, DHS, FBI, government at large, NIST, to try to identify, and if we identify a problem, we jointly give that back to industry and say, here's a problem with the phone. So there's a great partnership there. And I think the cyber legislation will help grow that part.
Well, I want to ask you about that because it's coming for a vote, maybe cloture today, maybe a debate next week. But let me go back to the general infrastructure question. Why aren't we better prepared for some kind of a massive cyber attack? Or to put it another way, whose fault is it?
Why are you looking at me? Oh, there's only one of you.
That's right.
This is why we wanted two up here on this panel, so we could point to somebody.
Well, you can answer twice as long.
That's right, and deny it. Well, from the cybercom perspective, it's not my fault. And as the director of NSA, it's not my fault.
Okay.
Probably shared. Well, whose fault is it? I think actually this is something that the government is working. I think the president has made clear statements on this in 2009. We set up the Comprehensive National Cyber Initiative in the Bush administration, and the Obama administration has followed through on that to push cybersecurity. So this is something that everybody is interested in, and we are working our way through. The Defense Department stood up Cyber Command to help work this out. The issue, education and moving forward on the legislation. And I do think, in talking to both the Democrat and the Republican side of both the House and the Senate, everybody is interested in getting this legislation through. They know this is a problem. And they are looking at it as a bipartisan. Yes, they have different perspectives on it, but they all know how important this is. And I'll tell you, my conversations with them couldn't be better in terms of, if the American people heard what they're saying is, this is important for our country and moving it forward. So I wouldn't blame it as much as say, this is fast-moving technology. Look at how fast we have gone from the iPad to the iPhone and the capabilities that we have with digital capabilities. And now you can send video, and somebody could record parts of what we're doing. Oh, he is. And send that to friends around the world, things that we could never do before. The issue is, now as we go forward, we have to ensure that security is brought into that equation. And that's not just my job. That's DHS. They do a great job at that, and they're standing that up. FBI, Bob Mueller and his team at the NCI-JTF are absolutely superb to work with.
So I take it what you're saying is it's everybody's fault that we're not better prepared. It's government maybe slow to respond, and industry even slower.
I'd say we all share in that responsibility.
Now, we talk about a range of threats. The 13-year-old named Jason in his basement who's trying to hack into the Defense Department. But I want to start on the other end, the serious threat, the serious cyber attack. How many countries or groups in the world do you think are capable of carrying out a serious cyber attack against the U.S.?
I would put serious, when you take serious cyber attack, nation-state sponsored with cryptologic capabilities integrated in, there's several that could pose that kind of threat. I would subtly change some of the words we heard this morning to the fact that whether it's nation-state or a hacker, somebody who finds a vulnerability in our infrastructure could cause tremendous problems. And some of those problems are things as simple as erasing the basic input-output of a system so that it can't boot, which means your system now would have to be replaced. And these kinds of capabilities are not nation-state only capabilities. These are things that you can go out on the network and get. And the issue is capacity, and bringing it together. So when you ask whose fault it is, I would look to the internet service providers and Symantec, McAfee, the antivirus community, and say, you know, they've done a pretty good job. They have done a pretty good job, but it's not good enough. Industry can't do it by itself. Government can't do it by itself. We need to work as a team. And that's what it's going to take from my perspective. There are great folks in industry who have some great insights into this that we can bring forward. And that's the only way we're going to prevent those several states from mounting a real attack on this nation in cyber. If we don't operate as a team, it's not going to happen.
We think about the nuclear threat, and we sort of know what the nuclear powers are. But is that the wrong model to use in analyzing the cyber threat? Because I have in my mind that maybe there's, and you fill in the number here, you know, several dozen, whatever, countries that are sophisticated enough to mount a major cyber attack. Is that the wrong model to think about? It could come from anywhere, you're saying?
I think it is the wrong model. And the reason is, when you look at the deterrence theory of nuclear strategy, some of it was based on mutual assured destruction, knowing who did what when, knowing who the adversary was and what their capabilities are. And the speed of it was slower than cyberspace. You know, a piece of information can circumnavigate the globe in about 133, 134 milliseconds. That's your decision space in cyber, half that. And so when you look at 67, and I'm just helping you out. Yeah, you're welcome.
You're rounding.
And so when you think about that, attribution is difficult. And at the beginning of an exchange in cyber, when somebody's attacking Wall Street or one of these activities, the first thing is defend the country, ensure that it stays up, and have the authorities in place and the ability to work with industry so that you know that attack is going on. And then you can go through similar procedures. But it is a different theory in cyberspace. And enter in now hacker groups with tremendous capabilities and non-nation state groups that can come together and provide some significant problems. My concern is when you look at it, you've seen a lot of exploit on the networks over the past decade, and those are going to continue. And you've seen disruptions, like in Estonia in 2007, Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, and you can go around. We've seen them here in the United States, distributed denial of service attacks on our infrastructure. They're growing. Those are disruptive. What I'm concerned about is the shift to destructive. And those are the things that will hurt our nation, and we have to be ready and prepared to defend against that.
Give us an example of destructive versus disruptive.
So a destructive attack, a disruptive one would be, I'll use my kids. So I have 4 daughters and 14 grandchildren. I had to work that in. And so they're in the back of the car, big car, and they're yelling and screaming, and I'm trying to talk to my wife. So they disrupt that communications until they stop, that traffic goes away, then we can talk. Now put a gang back there with weapons, and they can now shoot. That's a whole new ballgame. But and in this case, what they could do is destroy parts of our infrastructure like routers, servers, actual end devices that would have to be replaced. And if you do that in such a way, some of the replacement of that would take weeks or months.
Have you seen evidence of people trying to do that now? People or states or groups?
We are seeing evidence of both nation-state and non-nation-state attacks on infrastructure and our commercial entities.
Right now, trying to do that kind of destructive attack?
Well, I can't say right now because I'm up here. I could run out and look real quick.
These days?
Yes, right now.
You've mentioned this legislation several times, so let's get to it. This is Congress considering bills that would give the Department of Homeland Security a greater role in setting performance requirements for industry. Let me ask you this general question. Why is that something that the government should set when many people say the government's own security standards haven't been very good if you look at the number of times government websites, for example, are taken down?
That's a great question. No, I'm not going to defer it. But that would have sounded better. When you look at it, neither group can say they're better. And so there are things that industry knows better than government in protecting and setting standards. So they have to be part of it. And I think in the legislation, the intent is to bring those together. Then the government knows things that industry doesn't know. If we were to be completely candid here, The reality is industry's getting hacked, government's getting hacked. What we need to do is come together and form best practices. And I like to point to the SANS top 20. If you go to the SANS Institute, they have the critical 20 things that you should do to protect your network. I think that's a great starting point. Look at that, what they say it takes. Now, that was actually a government industry kind of and allied look at what it takes to set standards for our networks. And there's a lot of information out there going back and forth. I do think it needs to be, we need to work together on this. And that's, as you've already identified, that's the most difficult part of the legislation. How do we set that right? We don't want to be a burden to industry, big government coming in. And when you talk to DHS, they don't want to do that. They just want to help set the standards so that their mission, what they're trying to do, is something that they can actually do. How do we set that? So I think it's headed in the right direction.
But there's a big issue here about whether you set standards and let industry voluntarily comply, or whether you require them to comply and have sanctions or punishments or fines if they don't comply. Given your earlier assessment that the state of our cyber defenses are at a 3, how can voluntary compliance work?
Well, I think voluntary and incentivized can work.
What does
and
incentivized mean?
Incentivized, they get special dispensation if they do certain acts to secure their networks. Remember in one of my earlier statements, many companies don't know what to do. So we got to help set that standard. So the answer is you're not going to fix these networks this week. This is going to take time. And what we've got to do is to say, so if you're going to fix your networks, here's kind of how you need to implement the architecture to fix your network. Put that out. Get folks working towards that. I think what will happen is this area will actually, it's a combination of very difficult to regulate, and there's a lot of literature out there, and I think they're making me read, as an Army officer, this is very difficult, some of my folks. Larry Lessig's The Code is the Law talks about, so how do we do this? This exact question that you have. What's the role of government? What's the role of industry? And the reality is what you come down to is you need both. You need to bring this together in a way, in a team-like approach that helps secure this infrastructure. I think there's a lot of good in that.
Well, I know this really isn't, it's not a policy that's up to the NSA director to set, but what I hear you saying is, if we tell industry the right things to do, then it's going to be in their benighted self-interest to do it. But if that were true, wouldn't they already have done it?
Perhaps in some cases. In many cases, they are doing it. So, I talked about the internet service providers. They probably could set the standards. You look at the financial industry, they're doing what they could and should do. There are others out there who need help. As you look at that, it's setting that standard across all those and helping those who really need help that are pathways into other networks that we have to fix. I think that's the best approach that we can get to today. I think this is going to evolve over time. I think what we legislate, what they work their way through over the next few days, is something that over the next few years will continue to evolve, and it must, because the networks are going to evolve.
It sounds like it will be voluntary compliance, though, doesn't it?
I believe so. I don't know where everybody's going to vote, but it does sound like it's going to be a form of voluntary, and I'd add incentivized compliance.
Let me. I want to ask you a couple more questions about cyber, and then move on to the other side of your mission in the Cyber Command. But take us through what your role would be in a major cyber attack. I know that NSA, for example, is barred from responding to strictly domestic threats. So your folks in those command centers detect an attack. How do you know where it's coming from? How do you know whether this is your ball or someone else's?
So I think to really explain that, let me step back and talk about the roles and responsibilities. Because I think it's important for us to have a common understanding of those roles and responsibilities. And that's not often discussed when we talk about cyber legislation. And so you've got Bob Mueller, NCI, JTF, FBI, with law enforcement counterintelligence responsibilities. They do a great job. DHS, they're the public face, and they're the ones that work with industry to help bring the standards, to help ensure that we're partnered with industry and that we have a way of sharing our information with industry, and industry has for sharing it with us. And actually, there's some goodness in having DHS there. If DHS is there with FBI, with DOD, with NSA, with Cyber Command, then everybody knows what we're doing is right. There is none of this conspiracy theory. They're sending this directly to him, and we're not sure what he's doing with it. Now, how does it work? Well, I'll give you a hypothetical situation. If a series of attacks went against one of our sectors, the first thing we need to know is we need to see it. And so working with industry under this new legislation, industry would be able to share with us the fact that a packet of information with destructive tools just hit their intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system. Think of it as their walk through their first line of defense. And what they do is immediately send that to DHS, where it's now burst out to the rest of government. We see it, DHS sees it, FBI sees it. We have FBI, abs of steel. Okay, no, it was actually my hand. We actually would all see it. We have DHS personnel up at our centers. We have FBI folks up at our centers, and we have them down in theirs. We sometimes refer to that lovingly as hostage exchange program. And the goodness of that is everybody sees the information at the same time. If it's an exploit or some type of crime, then it's over to them. We provide the technical support if needed. If it's an attack on the country, now it's over to us, the Defense Department, Cyber Command, and everybody else is in support. Now there's a key part of this. That packet just didn't get there by itself. It had to come from someplace. In fact, on the packet, to actually navigate the network, you need a to from address. So you can say it came from, and we can check that at network speed and say it came from that foreign address. Why is that sending it to us? And if you see multiple foreign addresses in those packets, you can begin to put together what's going on and the strategy for deflecting that. That responsibility would be Cyber Command's responsibility. And everybody would be partnered together. DHS would have a responsibility here, and FBI would. DHS would have a responsibility, we're great. Cyber Command, great. We're not going to be able to stop everything. What happens when some gets through? That's where DHS and the defense support to civil authorities really comes together. And that's one of their key lanes. And so while they're taking care of helping to build back America, we're trying to defend it. And at the same time, remember, this happens, we're talking milliseconds, so you need standing rules of engagements and authorities. The next thing we do is put together if it was an actual attack, some kind of online secure video teleconference with the White House, DHS, with all the key players, and talk about where you are, what you're doing, and what your next steps are. And that's where the President and the Secretary would come in.
Well, let's go back to that hypothetical. So you see evidence of this. The power companies and the water utilities are saying to you, look, country X is sending us all these nasty packets. Now instead of talking to you as the head of NSA, I'm talking to you as the commander of the U.S. Cyber Command. At what point do you decide to just defensively put up a shield or offensively go and disable the thing that is sending them to you?
That's a great question, and that's where standing rules of engagement, execute orders, and pre-planned issues have to be done. And so we work with the interagency and say, if this kind of attack works, here's what we need to be able to do. Now, the reality is the first step, the internet service providers, in many cases, will be that first line of defense. They're going to see it. They actually see it before the target sees it. And so they're going to stop it. They're not going to let it go through and say, this is really going to hurt. We saw that one go through. That hurt. I knew that. It's the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, right? He comes down and we're not going to let him go through and say, yeah, that's going to hurt. Whew. The intent is the internet service providers, they own and operate the basic layer. They can stop a lot of this. But if we leave it just there, the adversary could penetrate through. So what they're going to do is they're going to tell the government, they're trying to get to these. They're going to tell those industries and other players, they're coming after you. So everybody is now aware that this is ongoing, all at network speed. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Now, but what about the second part of it, of going and trying, rather than just putting up the defensive, go out and disable the attacker?
So I think at that point, remember, we would need standing rules of engagement and execute orders that allow the government to do defense that's reasonable and proportional. And those have to be decided ahead of time. Can't be something that's after the fact, this would have been really useful. And let me give you a case in point. You used the nuclear program earlier. So if a nuclear weapon is coming in, you didn't want folks to set up a meeting, say, shoot, what are we going to do about that? Well, let's have a meeting. We'll meet you guys down at the White House in about an hour. Bring in your plans, get somebody to put together a briefing, and we'll decide what to do. Somebody came up with the bright idea of saying, why don't we shoot it down? That's good. Well, that would mean you'd have the authority to do that. And we do. And I think those are reasonable and proportional. Now, there are things that you could do to turn off a process that I think don't get up to a certain level. And there are things that I believe the president, the administration, the policy makers would say, you can do up to here, get the civets together, and tell us what more you need to do to defend the nation and what other steps we should take. Because our response may be beyond cyber. And the president's 2009 statements were just that. We reserve the right to respond to this kind of an attack on the country. He has a whole portfolio of options that he can do.
But are there those standing rules of engagement now? Do you have clear protocols on what you can do on your own?
We are working right now with the Joint Staff, OSD, and the interagency on establishing those. And I think part of that is getting the legislation. So right now we can't see it. But I think those are all coming together. We have the authority to do that on the Defense Department networks right now. So the good news...
Attacks on the Defense Department.
The good news is if the Defense Department is attacked, we're good to go. Somebody pointed out, but hold it, you depend on all the rest of that. And it doesn't make sense to say, well, I can stop the missile here, but anything going on you guys, sorry. So we're taking that on. I think there will be some great discussion on that. It's the right thing to do.
Should there be a public debate on what those rules of engagements are? I mean, for example, we had this, even though the use of nuclear weapons and how we would deploy them has always been classified, we've had a sort of public debate about the appropriateness of using them. Should we have a similar public debate about how far you can go? I mean, I think, for example, if country X is attacking us, do you stop it at our border? Do you offensively go and just turn off that computer? Do you turn off a whole segment of a whole network of computers in country X? Do you take down their power grid? I mean, should we have a public debate over what you ought to be able to do, just as we have sort of a public discussion about using even conventional military forces?
That's a good policy question.
What would be a good policy answer?
Well, we'd have to get some policy folks in here to answer that. From my perspective, I don't believe that we want to dictate by a set of everybody vote how many think it's this one or this one. I think those are the roles and responsibilities that we have, the President, Congress, and the judicial branches here, is to do just that for the American people and trust that they'll do that right. My experience in both administrations, these are great people trying to do the job right. What concerns me as you go through that, you'd say, well, you can use this tool but not this tool, without knowing what that really means. And here it gets to education. How do you educate everybody so that they understand exactly what you're saying and what that does? So, first, my experience is everything that we're being asked to do or we would be allowed to do comports with the law, international law. I don't see any issues there. I think the real issue is now, how do you really account for the different types of threats that can come at this nation and ensure we are prepared to defend against those? That's where it really becomes difficult. So that would be my non-policy answer.
Okay. Part of the mission of the U.S. Cyber Command, and I'll quote from it, is when directed to conduct full-spectrum military cyberspace operations. Have you undertaken any such missions in Cyber Command?
Yes, but I can't go into that.
Lots of them? Just a few?
I'm going to get Bill McCraven to answer some of these questions for me. He had a much better way of answering.
I mean, is this something that goes on every day, twice a year?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer.
Okay, fine. What about the malware called Stuxnet?
That's easy for you to
Dooku,
say.
yeah, flame. Is that the kind of thing the U.S. could legally undertake?
Again, I'm not going to answer that. I will say that the president has the authority to direct operations on the network, and it would comport with law, and I'll leave it at that.
All right, well, let me ask you this then. As a general matter, are you satisfied that the U.S. has the capacity, the capability to, in the words of your mission, to conduct full-spectrum military cyberspace operations? I asked you earlier about the condition of the infrastructure, and you said we were about on a 3. So on the same sort of 1 to 10 scale, where are we on the ability to undertake that part of your mission?
A little bit better. I think the issue that we have is not necessarily tools, it's capacity, building and training the force. And so if I were to leave you a few things on what does it take to get there, it's building and training a cyber force. And the services are doing a great job trying to build that up, but that takes time. And so what we have is we have a big requirement and a small force that's growing steadily. And our job is over the next year or two is to get that force fully trained and ready to accomplish all the missions that we're being asked to do. And I think we're on track to do that.
You know, we've been making this comparison between cyber attacks and nuclear attacks, and you talked about the response time. Given that there's just a matter of, I think you said 67 milliseconds, it takes information to go around the world, such a short response time. Does that, because there's such a hair trigger, does that suggest that the best course of action for you is to be the first responder rather than waiting? You know, we get into this sort of first strike debate in nuclear terms. Is there a similar force at work here in cyber?
Actually, I don't think that's the best strategy. And this gives me an opportunity to bring up a couple things here. One, we talked about how we need to partner with industry to see what's going on in cyberspace. Two, we need a defensible architecture. DoD is going to that with the Joint Information Environment, which is a cloud-like environment, which greatly reduces that attack surface, if you will, and allows us to update and defend our systems like we've never been able to do before. I think those are key in moving this forward and where we're going. So from my perspective, those are a couple of the big issues. Go ahead.
Well, in the counterterrorism world, which we've been talking about some today, the holy grail is predictive intelligence, trying to get into their strategy sessions, identify the key players so we know what they're going to do, what their next attack is going to be, so we can disrupt the plots. Can that be done in the cyber world to know how the adversary looks at our vulnerabilities and what kind of attacks they're planning?
So intelligence is key to this. All source intelligence is key to helping defend our networks, and that's part of the capabilities that the government brings to that government industry capability. We have and know things about the adversary's capabilities, but we need to protect those. They're classified. If we gave those out, the adversary would know those, and in very short order would have a workaround on it. Let me just go back on your offensive one, because I didn't answer the whole question, I think, the way I should have here, which is the reason that I talk about going to the cloud infrastructure and looking at this is when we put together this ability for our nation to work as a team in cyberspace, what that allows us to do now is do things that other countries aren't capable of doing in defending the nation. So today, the offense clearly has the advantage. Get cyber legislation in there, bring industry and government together, and now we have a capability to say, you don't want to attack us. We can stop it, and there are other things that we can do to really make this hurt. So I think this legislation is key in helping us get there. We don't want to have to exercise this, and we want people to know that if you attack us, we're going to be able to defend, and then as the president said, he has options of how he can respond. And the key is having a defensible capability that can survive that first onslaught. And so if you think about the nuclear portion of this, a bad situation would be all their nuclear weapons hit, but you say, wait, we've got some, we can fire back. I'm thinking, hold it. What about that's a bad thing, right?
Right.
We lost all our country, now they're going to lose all theirs, mutual assured destruction. That doesn't sound good. So what we want is a defensible, survivable infrastructure. And that's why we need to work together. And I think that's the teaming that has to come in here. And part of that is not just our country, but our allies. They're going to be part of that equation.
Do you feel, though, that you have a pretty good visibility in terms of what the vulnerabilities are, what the capabilities of our adversaries are? Do you have good vision out there on what that is?
We have good insights into the malicious software that's out there. If you talk to McAfee, they'll tell you they have 75 million pieces of malware or versions of it. So there's a lot. What concerns me is we know what we know. I think you've heard this before. It's the unknown unknowns that you don't know, you know, and I think you do. So that's what concerns me, is there are smart people out there who come up with exploit capabilities to go into vulnerabilities that we never thought of. So cleaning up all of this stuff on the networks is going to go a long ways to helping us see some of those issues.
What are the next generation threats? What do you think? I mean, we're talking about malware and things that are hidden in emails and all that sort of stuff, and we have a pretty good idea of what that is. But what are the next generation threats beyond that?
So, as I stated a little bit earlier, I think the next generation are going to be destructive attacks. I think we're always going to see people out there trying to exploit for crime. I think we're going to see people trying to exploit for intelligence. What concerns me is when somebody jumps onto a series of mobile devices and then throws an attack against one of our critical infrastructure key resources. Now we've got a problem. So the issue is that's coming. I'm concerned that as those types of exploits morph to destructive, we've got to be ready. And that, I think, is going to come. Now, good news. I do think there are government industry partnerships to help mitigate as many of these vulnerabilities as possible. DHS plays a great role in sharing that with industry, saying, here's what we do. We pass that through DHS to industry if we see a vulnerability. It's in our best interest because if you see a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows, it may be that the Defense Department of the government uses Microsoft Windows. We'd sure want that fixed. And so sharing those is in everybody's best interest.
I want to ask you just a couple more questions and then take questions from the rest of the folks here. But I want to go back to the infrastructure for a moment. I remember, what was it, maybe 10 or so years ago, there was a power line that got hot and sagged in Ohio and shut down the whole northeastern U.S. for quite a long time. And the commute in New York was a mess and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't seem like a very robust infrastructure to me. So going back to your assessment of how good the infrastructure is, you said you think some are better than others. Clearly, some are worse than others. What is, as a general matter, are the parts of the infrastructure about which you worry the most?
I'm worried most about the power. I'm worried about water. I think those are the ones that need the most help. You hit it on the head with the 2003. If you look at what happened there was race conditions set up that a power line was down, and this was in software, so what happened is a tree hit multiple ones of those, and the signal going back to the center to say you got one down came in, but they came in so close together that the software had a problem with it. It said, oh, I've got a problem here, and it shut down, so it didn't know that it had a power problem. Now other sectors are saying, oh, we've got a big storm here, I've got power. So everybody started drawing power without that one center up and operating, and it quickly cascaded throughout the Northeast and the rest. And this is on the web, publicly available. Therefore, when you think your way through that, you say, what does an adversary need to do? And you can see that there are things in there and actions that could take. Now, my experience with the power companies and their CEOs, all very positive. Admiral McConnell led a discussion with several of these several years ago, and their comments were, we need help. And so when you look at it, what they're asking, and they are on a very slim margin of profit. And this is an issue for them. So fixing it, helping them fix this, not making it really burdensome, but helping them to fix their networks is going to be key. I think first step is giving the internet service providers the capability to ensure that those things going into and out of their network can be protected. I think that's a huge step forward.
How do you do that?
Well, we've actually pioneered that with DHS in something that we call the Defense Industrial Base Pilot, and now we're doing one with an enhanced version of that with DHS that would say, we'll set this framework up, the internet service providers would actually run it, we'll give them signatures, and they can help block stuff going into this pilot group.
You tell them what to watch for.
We add to what to watch for, because remember, industry is good in this too. They see things that we may not see. And so when you put what we know and what they know on the table, now we have the best of both, and we can use that to protect. And with the legislation, they could now share with us at network speed these issues that they see.
Without the legislation, the industry can't share with you what the threats are?
Not in real time, and not with without some form of liability. So that's a problem, and they can't share it today easily. And there are issues with that sharing arrangement. How do we give them classified information? Under what means do we do it? How do they protect it? And what happens if something goes wrong, that we give them a malformed a signature that's not exactly right? We make a mistake. That has not yet happened yet, but it could. Okay, that was a joke. So let's say we make a mistake on our signatures. That happens a lot. And something gets through and hurts an industry, and they say, but you were supposed to protect me. You made a mistake. They get sued. We've got to come up with a framework that allows us to work through those types of issues.
I want to ask you one other question about privacy, and read to you a statement from a former NSA employee named William Binney, who recently told a hackers conference that the NSA is putting together dossiers on every U.S. citizen, listing who we have relations with, what our activities are. Is there any truth to that, and why do stories like this persist, that you're spying on all of us?
Yeah. First of all, it's not true. We aren't putting dossiers up on every U.S. citizen. In fact, we don't have a dossier on you. I've never seen one of your emails from an intelligence perspective or otherwise, actually. So from my perspective, these are grossly out of the truth. They really are. To think that we would be collecting on every U.S. person, one, that would be against the law. Two, we get great oversight by all branches of the government. You know, I must have been bad when I was a kid. We get supervised by the Defense Department. Not just the General Counsel, by the DNI, their General Counsel, so they see everything that we do. By the Justice Department, by the White House, by Congress, CISI, HPSI, and by the court. So all branches of government can see that what we're doing is correct. And so my concern is that false statements like these seem to persist, and you see those bounce around. And it only hurts because people think, well, they must have something there, and there must be some element of truth there. The fact is, we're a foreign intelligence agency. So if you look at some of these statements that have gone in, for example, the 702 FISA stuff, this allows us to use and leverage our infrastructure to go after foreign bad guys like terrorists and other things. Non-U.S. people. We may incidentally collect, as a result of targeting that foreign person, something about a U.S. person. Working with the Attorney General and others, we have what we call minimization procedures. Every time we do that, we have to ensure to everybody that we've done this right, and this is an auditable capability. And from my perspective, when you walk all the way through this, the reality is Congress knows we're not doing that. All branches of our government see that we're not doing it, and all of them can audit it. So from my perspective, it's, I would add that to Bill McCraven's. Not only should we stop leaks, but we should stop reporting this clearly not right. Unless you have UFOs, of course, then you can.
All right. Let's take questions from you all that you may have for General Alexander. We'll start right here.
Hey, it's Noah Shackman from Wired. Have you seen an uptick in infrastructure attacks since 2010? And a follow-up question after that.
Yes. Since 2009, we've seen roughly, and I'm calculating, about 17-time increase between 2009 and 2011. And
to what degree do you owe that to the unmasking of Stuxnet, which was an infrastructure attack that is widely assumed to be American-led? In other words, did our attack actually invite 17 times more of the same kind of attacks here at home?
I don't see the correlation there at all. In fact, what you're seing is actually things that are coming about, what I'll call natural exploits into infrastructure and attacks that are going on that would occur anyway. I don't see anything that goes to Stuxnet or anything like that.
What do you mean by natural?
Well, for example, somebody will see that this infrastructure is using this version of Windows, and they know that they can exploit that version of Windows with this capability. They then go in there, and they can get in there. Once they get into that system, they own the system. They can do anything they want with that system. And what you're seeing was that natural progression that I talk about, going from exploitation to disruption to destruction. And what they can do now with that box is they could do a whole series of things, to include calling up the BIOS, rewriting BIOS, and causing significant problems.
Right there.
Hi, Kevin Klein, Division of Homeland Security Emergency Management for the state of Colorado. How are we getting information below the ISP on exploits that also have an offensive use for us to go after somebody? So they're classified. How are we dealing with that problem of not being able to tell people exactly what to protect against?
So that's part of the legislation, is to have the authority to work and provide classified signatures to the internet service providers and other companies that may be involved, and that they have the ability to protect it and they know how to protect it, and not share this out with adversaries. So that is a key part. How government shares with industry is going to be key here.
Presumably, though, even if you get the legislation and you share some classified things, you won't share them all, right? I mean, there'll be some things. What things wouldn't you tell industry?
I don't know right now off the top of my head what we wouldn't tell them. In fact, I am more on the defend the nation side and make sure that we can defend against all of these than I am of protecting some of those. So from my perspective, if we know an adversary has these types of capabilities come after us, I think we're going to share all that. We want to protect this country from these kind of events.
Right here. Wait till you get the microphone, though. NSA can hear you anyway, but the rest of us can't.
Only if he uses, it's got to be digital.
General, could you just briefly comment on the threat of the stealing of intellectual property and the impact that could have on our economy over the next 20 years, and that's going on every day?
Right. Thanks. From my perspective, I describe this as the biggest transfer of wealth in history, where adversaries have gone into our companies and taken intellectual property. There are a whole series of different guesses at what that is, from up to $1 trillion by a McAfee report when you add in what it takes to fix it. We don't know. And perhaps, which is more alarming, that it's really larger, that we don't know how large it really is. But the fact is, this is our future. You know, when you think about it, what other countries are doing are stealing the next generation of capabilities. Let's jump back 25 years. You know, Silicon Valley was made by folks who stood up Microsoft, Intel, you know, the IBM, Dell, Yahoo, now Google. Put that down there. Look at what that has done good for this country. Now what if somebody had stolen all that and now could compete against that? Our market advantage and where our country is today would not be where it is. As a consequence, my concern is when we jump now to the future and people have stolen those things that we're building, and they can build it right now because they have the whole secret there, I think this is a huge problem. So that's one of the key economic things we've got to fix in this cyber-related realm.
In the back there, David.
Thank you, and thank you, General, for coming to do this. You mentioned before that you thought that there was a 17-fold increase in attacks on infrastructure. Can you give us a little sense of where you think those are coming from? Have you identified either countries or regions? And to follow up on the question you got asked at the beginning, once the Stuxnet virus got free in 2010 and people began to analyze it, there was a lot of concern that it could get cut up by other countries, by hackers, and parts of that be used back against the United States. Have you seen any evidence that, in fact, that has happened?
The latter first, no. We're not seeing evidence of that. And how we see some of these exploits or attacks into our infrastructure is one of the key things that we can work with industry, a way of seeing those, defending against those. I'm not sure I'm answering your first. Give me your first question again.
First question is, do you know what parts of the world?
Okay, right. So when we look at that 17-fold increase, a lot of that is done forensically. So we know an attack has occurred. We weren't there to protect it. So now what we're doing is we're getting the forensics, we're getting the log files, we're working with industry and FBI, and we might provide technical assistance. And everybody goes, look, here's what happened, and it's done after the fact. That's not what we want to do, but that's where we are today. And most of those are after the fact. Some of them can be attributed to nation states, and some are attributed to hackers and other criminals.
If you had a bar graph of how many are nation states or organized terror groups and how many are individual hackers in that increase, where would it be?
I think I can give you the right answer. I just don't think I don't want to get in trouble giving you the right answer, so I'll defer that one.
Half and half?
No, I think more is right now criminal and hackers. The majority, but not by a lot.
2 questions in the corner there.
Hi, Ken Delanian from the LA Times. General, following up on that question, in terms of the destructive attacks that you think are coming, who would be the likely perpetrators of those attacks? Are we talking about rogue states like Iran and North Korea? Are we talking about non-state actors? Has Al-Qaeda shown an interest in developing a cyber capability?
I believe it would be more the former than the latter, because I think it's aspirational for terrorists today, but not out of the realm of possible. And the reason I say that, and one of the things that you might look at, especially those of you who are in the news business, is you can get on the network and find something called Backtrack. And there's a book out there, The Basics of Hacking and Penetration Testing by Pat Engebretson. I don't get any money for talking about that book. What that book does is it shows you how to do good things to test networks. And the reason I say look at that is because you will be shocked, stunned, and amazed at how many publicly available capabilities there are right now that can exploit systems today. Publicly available.
You mean things we'd find on the internet?
Things we'd find. This is all can be done over the internet. You don't have to leave your computer. You can sit right there and you can. Now, the reason that I'm looking at this is it also offers some insights on how we should train our people across government. And we want to make sure our people are trained the best. And so looking at what they do, then looking at what we do, and then starting to set standards for training is going to be key. So I would just look at that and see what it does. And it's actually a fairly easy read. It's a little bit more difficult to lay down and pull the stuff off the network, but it's all free. And in there, you'll see that there's about 800 and some exploits that you can use against different versions of systems. And if somebody didn't patch their system properly, there's a vulnerability. And so what you quickly see is, wow, that's all publicly available. I'm going to DEF CON next. And everybody at DEF CON will have heard of all of that.
Explain what DEF CON is.
This is the Hackers Convention in Las Vegas. There's Black Hat in DEF CON. And one of the reasons I'm going there is some of these people, most of them are called hackers, but when you look at a lot of these are the guys who do penetration testing, who have created these tools like Nmap, which maps out networks, and Nessus, and all the great tools, Metasploit, that we would want our folks to be trained on. Well, they're the ones, some of those are the guys who did it. We need to take this a step further in cybersecurity. And we need them to help educate our country in cybersecurity. And I think there's some great things they can do.
The other corner question.
Yes, sir. Paula Broadwell, former military officer and academic, a research associate at Harvard Center for Public Leadership. I was wondering if you could talk about talent management a little bit and how we're developing this capability within the military right now, and how are you reaching out to academia to incentivize training and education in the pipeline, if you will, and how you compete with the private sector to keep talent in the military.
We actually do good in hiring, both on the Cyber Command and the NSA side. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a relationship with a number of universities and colleges, DHS and NSA and Cyber Command, in terms of curricula for information assurance, cybersecurity, and other things. And we are actually doing pretty good training people. My concern is, and it goes back to that previous question, when you start to look at the training programs, I think we need to expand it significantly. And what I would tell you is that the way we train our people who operate and defend the network is vastly different than those that we treat to exploit and to attack. But it's one network. And you wouldn't say to an infantry guy, okay, you're the defender, and you're the attack guy, and you're the scout. You know, you'd think, hold it, what did I just do? I sub-optimized my team. Why don't we train them all to a standard and make that a high standard? We got great people, we really do. And so, you know, this was one, and you had a question yesterday about women in the service. Here's a place where, you know, we're not quite 50-50, but over 40% are female. This is a great area. I have 4 daughters, I mentioned that, so they track the statistics closely. Okay, that was a joke, they don't. But 2 of them are computer programmers, and we wanted to get them to work for us, but they said the hours were too long. When you look at it, I think growing the military in this way, we're going to get great people. What do we need to do? And we are taking this on, each of the services. So the Chief of Staff of the Army, as an example, Ray Odierno, is working right now on how we set this up as a career field. How do we start to bring together the 53s with the others, the Signal, the Intel folks that are all working this, and make it one team? So that if you're a 53 or a Signal officer out there, today there's a ceiling about here. But what if they're the best? And you know some of these from your time up there at West Point. So a guy like Finelli, right? Probably one of the best in our country. So how do we get guys like that and bring them all the way through the system? That's what we've got to look at. There's another part. This is where military and civilian can partner. So this is I think, the great part about having NSA and Cyber Command co-located, because our civilian community has a great breadth of technical experience. You know, think of the math capabilities that came out of World War II that helped create NSA. That's the foundations for operating in cyber. We would absolutely want to leverage those folks and those linguists and those crypto mathematicians and those design, along with what we do at Cyber Command, and help make that one team for the good of this country. And we're doing that. So I think those are great things.
We have time for just a couple more questions over here. Yes, sir.
I've been poking around Washington 50 years. I don't want to say to everybody here, if you don't know it already, General Alexander is one of the good ones.
Thanks, sir.
When President Obama set up the cyber piece in 2009, he said, there shall be no monitoring in the U.S. Does this new bill, sharing of information between industry and government, going to impact privacy?
I don't believe it does, from my perspective. And let me tell you what it looks like. When you go on the road up the New Jersey Turnpike, you have an Easy Pass. And you put an Easy Pass in your car, and you can go right through on the fast lane now, and you go right through, and they just charge you $2 and it comes back in the mail. When you went under that road, it didn't look into your car and say, aha, we see the ambassador in there, we see he's got these letters, we see all this stuff inside his car, and we got that. All we needed to know was you were that barcode, that little return, and we just deducted it from your, not me, I don't get any money on those, so I just want to make that clear. So Easy Pass does that. In cyber, what we're talking about is intrusion detection systems, which are things that look for malware. So let's say that you send out a letter. What a bad guy is going to want to do is one, if they're on your system, they're going to want to put something in your letter, free, and let's call it an exploit that you'd send to Guy Swan. And so when you email Guy, you didn't intend that to go. Guy didn't want it, but now Guy's system has been exploited. So what the internet service providers are doing is looking for that code. They're not reading it. This is all hexadecimal. They're looking for a binary code with some specific things in it. And then they would stop that from hitting Guy, tell you that there was something bad, tell Guy. They didn't have to read your email. So I think it does meet that. And when I talked about education, it's those kinds of things I think we should all be up to speed on. So this debate on civil liberties and privacy, we hit right on the head. Here's, from my perspective, everybody at NSA and Cyber Command looks at your civil liberties and privacy as one of the things that we take dear to heart. We're not out there trying to go through all your email and all the stuff in there. We're trying to defend this country. We have no intent. In fact, my mother asked me why I don't read her email. That's a different story. I'm not reading my mother's email? Well, that's why I'm probably get in trouble, so please don't record that one. And we're not reading yours. We're looking for specific things. We're looking for terrorists on the NSA side, and we're trying to protect our infrastructure on the cyber side. And I think those are good things. And if we all technically understood that, this would be an easy debate. And that's the problem, is we don't. So the real issue is, how do we train America to be in the debate? And so Paul gave the answer out.
Last question. Yes, sir.
Speaking of Guy Swan, most of everything you've talked about today, and within the limits of time, I understand it, have been U.S.-centric. Our laws are defending our nation. Could you talk just a few minutes about interaction with allied nations? Are there commands like yours that you work with? And is there a role for international bodies in this, given that some of the nation states we're talking about would probably not comply with any of that?
Yeah, and before I do, so don't let me forget this question. Since Guy Swan stood up, I've known Guy for probably 22 years. Guy was in the G3 shop. I was in the G2. I was the G2 First Armor together. And you know, Bill McCraven talked about the integration of the operational and the intelligence community. It started in the first Desert Storm. Little Tommy Strauss, Guy Swan and his folks, we had a great ops intel. When we got into Iraq in 2005, our time frame for doing that, the ability to work with folks like Dave Petraeus, Marty Dempsey, Ray Odierno, and Stan McChrystal and Bill McCraven, and take our intel and say, here's what we can do to really help, was a real big step in the ops intel integration. And Bill made that statement, but I would tell you that it was the ops community that said, hey, we're going to bring this together because we need you to help us defend our troops and protect them. It was a huge step forward, and thanks to great folks like Guy and Bill McCraven, we were able to do that. So thanks, Guy. Thanks for what you did on that. Yes, there is a great part for working with our allies in this area. I'm not sure how all of that will come about, but look on a map that has all the cables on it. If you look, there's roughly 18 cables coming into our eastern seaboard. 12 come from the UK, 3 from France, 2 from Denmark, 1 from Spain. So it would make sense. We'd say, well, shoot, we could have defense in depth if you would ensure this stuff didn't get to us. And they're going to look at us and say, well, this pipe goes both ways. I just found that out. And so they might want to, that was another joke. Not a good one.
I'm laughing at all your jokes, by the way.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. And so they're going to want us to defend on our side of that. So there are natural ways that we can work together. And I think we ought to do that. And the same thing for sharing malicious software that we find and vulnerabilities and fixing them, both ways. And I think you are seeing that continue to grow.
Well, General Alexander, I know you don't often do interviews like this, so thank you for coming to the Aspen Security Forum.